So ever since the fourth Rambo movie came out almost 10 years ago, there's been talk of a fifth Rambo movie, there's been talk of a Rambo TV series, and it looks like they've settled on doing a Rambo reboot with a new actor, new creative team. And I'm just sitting here wondering, does Rambo make sense in the 21st century? So being born in the 80s, throughout my entire childhood, Stallone movies were always on TV, so I grew up on Rocky and Rambo. So according to my wife, Stallone is my favorite actor. I don't like to pick favorites, but she's probably not wrong, or she's not far off. She has good reason for thinking that. So there's a very dear place in my heart when it comes to the Rambo movies, especially Rocky, but Rambo movies as well. And so when they start talking about doing a reboot of Rambo, I'm of course interested. I don't mind reboots, even if they're terrible. It doesn't bother me. I still have the original. It's interesting to get new takes on things, but sometimes I think that certain reboots can miss the point of the original. And it's easy to miss the point of Rambo because parts 2, 3, 4 got very cartoonish. And in fact, there was literally a Rambo cartoon back in the 80s. That's how wonderful the 80s were. They would take rated R movies and then they would make kiddie versions of it, and they would make kiddie cartoons out of rated R movies. So that's probably actually why I was watching Rambo movies way too young. But, so it's easy to forget what First Blood was. So the first Rambo movie is called First Blood, and it's based off of a book called First Blood that's all about a Vietnam vet who's essentially homeless and wandering around trying to find his friends, his old war buddies, and discovers that most of them have died, and he's kind of all alone and gets into trouble with this local police officer. This is the plot of the original movie, and it's a very sad film because it's all about someone who's the one thing that he was good at was killing people. And he's an incredible soldier, the greatest soldier that's ever lived, and he comes back and he has no place in this world. And he's greatly damaged because of what happened during the war and what he experienced there. So he doesn't know how to function in normal society, but he's the best at something. And so then when he gets run into trouble with the law, essentially he reverts back, struggling from post-traumatic stress disorder, and reverts back into the soldier and goes to war with the police, and that's the only thing he knows how to do. And that's the plot of the first film. And so it's an engaging thriller, but it's very much a character study. And one element that's not in the movie that's in the book is the idea that the police officer chasing after him was a veteran of the Korean War. And so that's kind of the forgotten war. People remember World War II as this very heroic war, and they remember Vietnam as this very troubled time in our nation's past, but the Korean War is kind of forgotten. And so then there's another tension added into it of this his pride as a veteran, where everyone remembers Vietnam, but they don't remember his war. So there's a tension in the book. I haven't read the book. I've just read about the book because I'm such a big fan of the movie. So why do I say all this? Well, the problem is that the reason that story was intriguing and engaging is because it communicated deeply to something that happened in our country, where for a long, long time, the idea of serving in the military and going to war was something very heroic. And we speak of World War II as just this great war because we stopped evil. We stopped terrible things from happening. And so it was celebrated. And then the Vietnam War came, and people were drafted to fight a war that we weren't entirely sure what we were fighting for. And then people that were drafted into the war or thought that they were fighting for their country come back, and then there's people protesting them as the soldiers. And they're just trying to serve their country, or they were forced to serve their country and to do horrible things, be a part of horrible things that damaged them as people. And then they came back, and the people they thought they were serving rejected them. And that's what is at the center of this movie, First Blood. And the most important scene in all of the Rambo movies is this monologue at the end of the first film where Rambo basically, for the only time in the whole series, opens up and you get to know his heart, his soul, and pours out how broken of a person he is because of his experience in the war and the reaction of the people when he comes back. And this is really important because that is so unique to the experience of baby boomers, that baby boomer generation, those born late 30s, 40s, early 50s, in the Vietnam War, what they experienced at this time of great transition in our nation, and what the people that served our country, the experiences that they faced coming back after that war. And some of my dad did not serve in Vietnam, but some of my friends' dads did. And just the way they talked about it, the way, like, just whenever it came up, I remember having a very specific conversation at the dinner table with one of my friends, and his dad was there, and he was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. And it just shook him as soon as he started talking about it. And it was very troubled. It was like a very distinct memory from when I was about 12 years old, and how much he was hurt by what happened. That's at the core of the Rambo series. And it's very much tied to a time and period of the way a generation of our nation was hurt by what they had to do and the way people were treated. And that pain is at the center of this movie. Likewise, that's what leads to the pain of the second movie. And basically going where he's this tortured soul in the first movie, he becomes basically the superhero for hurt veterans in the second movie. So the problem with the Vietnam War was that we didn't know what we were fighting and we couldn't win. And so the second movie is all about the hurt veteran gets to go back and rescue his buddies and win the war. And there's even a line in the movie like, do we get to win this time? That's at the center of it. And so it was very much giving a generation of people what they wanted, the fantasy of we get to go back and we get to win. And that's what's in that movie. And it's tied so specifically to the 80s and the baby boomer generation's pain of what happened in the Vietnam War. It's tied so specifically to that. So why did I say all this? And then the series continues onward, and the third film, he goes to Afghanistan, and it's kind of funny now that you think about it, because he's not funny really, but he's kind of working with the people that would lead to the people that did the September 11th terrorist attacks, kind of. It's oversimplifying, of course, but it's kind of the way the story historically kind of would work with the way it plays out. And then in the fourth one is Burma. And so it becomes more of a character study of what does the soldier do as his life continues on. And he has a few moments where he gets to continue on. And the series ends with him returning home. The problem doing New Blood is what story are you telling that matters? Because if you just take soldier guy that goes crazy when he interacts with the police, that doesn't really tie into what made Rambo so interesting and so unique, because he's so tied to Vietnam and the way that functioned in our nation, in our culture. It doesn't really work. The reaction to the Desert Storm, the reaction to the Persian Gulf War, the reaction to the war on terrorism has not been the same. The way our nation responds to our veterans is very different. We have a lot of cynicism towards our government in what our government is choosing to do in the wars, and are they right? But it very much is not targeted veterans, very much probably because of we realized how much we messed up with Vietnam, and it's not the soldiers' fault. They are bravely serving our country. And so I don't know how you tell that story and modernize it. If they just retell the story of a Vietnam vet back in the 80s, that's weird if they did that, because that movie already exists and it exists perfectly fine. We don't need to tell that story again. And likewise, it doesn't match the generation. It's not a story for today's people. You would have to update it to a modern warrior soldier with modern experiences. And I don't know what you do that would be true to John Rambo with the wars that we've experienced over the last 20 years. So I don't know if it works. I say all of that. Now I'm going to turn it all around, everything I said, and say, I'm kind of interested in that, though, at the same time. I'm not a screenwriter. I'm not clever enough. If I was clever, I would love to be a screenwriter. I love to write and come up with stories. I just love to do that. So I wish I was good enough to be a screenwriter, or brave enough to be a screenwriter and try it. But I assume they're smarter than me, and perhaps that's what I'm missing, is that they've got the right angle on what that story is that story for veterans today that needs to be told, that needs to raise awareness of something, that communicates something while telling a thrilling story. Maybe they've figured that out. If they figured that out, because I looked at who wrote it and who directed it, and I don't know the names, and it looked like they've been a part of some things that were respectable, not just schlock. And so that would be cool if they made a very interesting, great thriller that's true and communicates something about modern times and the modern zeitgeist in regards to government and war and the way we treat veterans, that would be awesome. I would love it if they do that, and I'm hoping that's the case, since this is a franchise that's very near and dear to my heart. I just don't know what that looks like. I really don't know what that looks like for them to tell that story now, because it would be so different. And especially if they just go, Rambo's this awesome soldier guy that goes back to war and fights people. We've seen that 100 times. There have been all the knockoffs. There have been that type of story. It's just a trope in action movies. The guy that's awesome, that gets called to the task and is awesome. That's not what makes John Rambo interesting and unique. It's tied specifically to the Vietnam War, the zeitgeist at that time during Vietnam War and what that did to him, and then likewise the zeitgeist of the 80s and our reaction to it of people that responding and wanted this rah-rah, let's go win the Vietnam War and rescue the POWs and fight for the veterans. We don't have that now that I'm aware of. So I don't know what that looks like. So with all that said, what do you think? I would love to have a great conversation with someone about the Rambo movies, because I love these movies and I got into making these videos because I want to talk with you about things. What do you think? Do you see an angle to where they could do this? Or does this just feel like they're trying to turn this movie series into a continuing franchise, and therefore, of course, they want to make more of them and they're abandoning what it was all about? What do you think? Tell me in the comment section. I don't want to just talk about Rambo. I want to talk about Rambo with you. If you've enjoyed this video and want to hear me talk about more things, I would love it if you'd click that subscribe button so we can keep talking about movies. And thank you so much for watching.